Millionaire takes Mistress to an expensive concert, but pregnant wife catches them in the act. Power can be intoxicating, driving us to chase desires we once believed were out of reach. In the glittering heart of Manhattan, real estate tycoon Richard Harrington appeared to have it all: unparalleled wealth, a penthouse nestled among the most prestigious addresses on the Upper East Side, and a gentle wife, Evangeline, who was carrying his first child. Yet, beneath that sheen of success, Richard's restless heart yearned for danger he could not name. In a single night, everything he'd built would begin to crumble. It happened at Madison Square Garden, during a sold-out Beyoncé concert, when Evangeline discovered his brazen deceit in front of countless onlookers. From the outside looking in, Richard Harrington's ascent to wealth was the stuff of fairy tales. Born to middle-class parents in a modest Queens neighborhood, he had turned a knack for spotting undervalued properties into a lucrative real estate enterprise by his early 30s. While friends back home saw him as unstoppable, the truth was that he'd labored under extraordinary pressure for years. He was always chasing bigger projects: skyscraper deals near Times Square, high-end condominiums overlooking Central Park, investment partnerships with international financiers. That relentless pursuit had paid off handsomely. By the time he turned 41, he commanded respect and admiration from every corner of the industry. He was the wonder kind who struck gold every time he staked a claim. In closed-door meetings, he demonstrated remarkable instincts for risk-taking, sealing contracts that others believed impossible. Yet, those who worked with Richard noticed a more unsettling trait. There was always an undercurrent of restlessness beneath his polished exterior. While publicly he boasted about his latest victory, privately he spoke about the next big conquest he needed to undertake. His board members offered praise for his ambition, but they whispered among themselves that he rarely seemed satisfied. His personal staff watched him pace his office at odd hours, phone glued to his ear, searching for the next high-stakes endeavor that might finally placate the void within. In the midst of this grinding pursuit, Richard met Evangeline at a gala for philanthropic donors to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Born into a family of quiet affluence, Evangeline possessed a warmth that drew him in instantly. She offered him respite from the deal-making frenzy that had come to define his life. Her intellect, grace, and understated confidence grounded him. When they dated, she showed him corners of New York that weren't about profit margins: an old bookstore in the village, a small museum dedicated to local history, a hidden cafe where jazz trios still played. With her, life felt calmer, more meaningful. Their marriage was a grand affair in a cathedral draped with orchids, covered in every society column. Some attendees joked that the union signaled Richard's final step into genuine upper-crust respectability. Evangeline's maternal instincts shone through from early on. She volunteered at charities for children, adored her nieces and nephews, and spoke fondly of starting her own family. When she announced her pregnancy, Richard publicly rejoiced, praising Evangeline as the pillar of his personal life. Privately, though, he experienced pangs of anxiety. What would fatherhood demand from him? Could he still chase the heady excitement of business expansions and high-stakes deals if he had to anchor himself at home? Those questions gnawed at him in the late hours. Before the pregnancy, he and Evangeline had spent evenings strolling along the riverside, sharing quiet confessions about their hopes. Now, Richard's confessions dwindled. He withdrew into an echo chamber of business dinners, new client meetings, and mysterious private negotiations. Each time Evangeline asked him where he'd been, he offered vague answers that left her uneasy. They had no shortage of money or material comforts, but they lacked the honesty that had once been the bedrock of their bond. Evangeline Harrington had grown up in a stately brownstone on the Upper East Side, her childhood colored by warmth and possibility. Raised by parents who believed in the values of empathy and cultural enrichment, she had never learned to navigate duplicity. Her academic years were spent at reputable schools, her college degree in art history fueling her passion for museum curation. Though she hadn't pursued a full-time career after marrying Richard, she frequently volunteered as a docent at local galleries. She was known for her gentle demeanor, always wearing a disarming smile. During the initial months of her pregnancy, Evangeline tried to brush aside worries about Richard's prolonged absences. She reassured herself he was merely working harder because of the baby on the way. But small, unsettling signs kept surfacing. Unexplained late-night calls he dismissed as global client issues, the sudden cancelled lunches with her, and the hush that fell whenever she walked into a room where he and his assistant whispered. One evening, Evangeline attempted a romantic gesture by surprising him at his 34th floor office, carrying homemade shortbread cookies, a craving she indulged during her pregnancy. She expected to find him buried in paperwork. Instead, she discovered his office empty, the lights off. His assistant looked panicked to see her. After some stumbling, the assistant claimed Richard had gone to a last-minute dinner meeting. Evangeline glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 9:00 p.m. If he was gone on such short notice, why hadn't he mentioned anything? Tiny cracks splintered her sense of security. She recognized the hollowness in Richard's eyes when he did return. Sometimes she woke at dawn to find the bed empty, her husband apparently sleeping in the guest room or possibly coming home after she'd fallen asleep. She saw changes in the penthouse itself, new cologne brands in the bathroom, random receipts in his pockets for restaurants she didn't recognize. Desperate not to let suspicion unravel her, Evangeline sought reassurance. She confided in her sister Margaret, who responded with furrowed brows. "Are you sure you're not overreacting? Men in high finance come and go at odd hours," Margaret said, though she remained uneasy. When Evangeline pressed further, Margaret's advice was blunt. Get to the bottom of it. Don't let him brush you aside. Evangeline made an effort at direct confrontation. She sat Richard down after a tense dinner, telling him how it felt to sleep alone so often, pregnant with their child, wondering if he might walk through the door at midnight or dawn. His excuses centered on the obligations of being a self-made mogul. "I'm doing this for us so our child can have every opportunity," he insisted. Evangeline sensed a deeper truth lurking beneath his excuses, but she couldn't bring herself to accuse him outright. As the pregnancy advanced, her intuition sharpened. Her motherly instincts told her something was gravely amiss. Though she kept up the facade of the supportive wife, searching for nursery furniture and comparing baby names, Evangeline knew the structure of their marriage was weakening. She was about to discover just how fragile it truly was. Richard Harrington's life took an explosive turn the night he met Bianca Martel, though she would introduce herself to many as Bianca Street James. They crossed paths at a Manhattan charity fundraiser supporting the American Ballet Theatre. Unlike Evangeline, whose presence emanated a gentle warmth, Bianca dazzled like a lightning bolt. Tall, confident, with auburn hair cut in an expensive style, she wore a shimmering gown that drew every gaze in the ornate lobby. She approached Richard with a calculated air of intrigue, praising him for his philanthropic commitments. At first, he assumed she was just another socialite scrounging for wealthy investors. But as they spoke, he discovered she had a sharp mind. She rattled off suggestions for real estate expansions in Europe, teased him about how he should consider the allure of other markets, and adeptly probed whether he was interested in joint ventures abroad. There was electricity between them, fueled by mutual curiosity and something more primal. Bianca revealed a background in property development overseas, claiming she had the connections to open doors in Monaco and street Barts. Richard, simultaneously impressed and unnerved, exchanged business cards. It was, ostensibly, just networking. Soon after, Bianca invited him to a sleek cocktail lounge in Tribeca to discuss potential collaborations. Over top-shelf whiskey, she regaled him with stories of foreign investors who craved a piece of the Manhattan skyline. She complimented his risk-taking spirit, casting him as a visionary. Their conversation blurred the line between professional and personal. Before the night ended, they had shared an unabashed kiss in the back of her town car. In the following weeks, Bianca's presence crept into Richard's life like a luxurious, slow poison. She texted him at odd hours, sending flirtatious messages about future conquests, both financial and physical. He rationalized that it was purely business with an entertaining twist. Each time he accepted her invitations, though, he stepped closer to emotional betrayal. Richard discovered a new thrill in her company, a rush reminiscent of his early days in real estate when every deal felt like a gamble. Bianca seduced him, not just with her body, but with her portrayal of him as unstoppable, powerful, deserving of more than a predictable marriage. While Evangeline carefully planned baby showers and checked pediatric appointments, Richard found himself sneaking away to late-night dinners with Bianca in hushed, dimly lit private booths. Those stolen moments with Bianca left him both exhilarated and guilty. He had promised Evangeline the world. Now, he was giving pieces of himself to someone else. The flicker of shame never entirely left him, but the impetus to feed his restlessness overrode any moral hesitation. He told himself it was harmless, a quick fling, a temporary aberration. He would handle any fallout. Yet the fallout would turn out far beyond his control. Evangeline's world tilted on its axis when an acquaintance, a polite but tactless socialite named Candace, dropped a hint at a weekend luncheon. "So, dear, did Richard have a good time at Bemelman's bar on Thursday?" Candace asked over a delicate slice of chocolate torte. Evangeline paused, not recalling any mention of Bemelman's. "He was in late meetings, I believe," she replied, puzzled. Candace's expression flickered, realizing she might have overstepped. "Oh, perhaps I'm mistaken," she murmured, turning her attention to the dessert. But the discomfort in her eyes told a different story. That evening, Evangeline confronted Richard. He shrugged off the suspicion. "I did step into Bemelman's for a quick drink with a potential investor," he said. "Didn't think it was important enough to mention. A version of the truth, maybe," but Evangeline felt the tension under his words. Her doubts solidified after an online gossip column published a blurry photo of Richard stepping out of a private car with a woman whose face was partially obscured. The caption read, "Prominent NY developer Richard Harrington spotted with mystery companion." Granted, tabloids love to spin ordinary events into scandals, but Evangeline couldn't ignore the mounting signs. One especially painful close call occurred on a bright Tuesday afternoon when Evangeline finished a prenatal checkup and realized she still had time to meet Richard for lunch. She sent him a quick text, but he didn't respond. On a whim, she decided to surprise him at a restaurant near Bryant Park, a place they once frequented together. Walking through the glass doors, Evangeline scanned the room, feeling her heart seize when she glimpsed the back of a man who appeared to be Richard. Seated with him was a stunning woman with fiery auburn hair. They were chatting intently, leaning closer than two mere colleagues would. Before Evangeline could step forward, the pair abruptly rose from the table and exited through a side door. She only caught a partial glimpse of Richard's profile as he walked away. In that fleeting moment, she recognized an intimacy in his posture, a gentle hand resting on the small of the woman's back, the hush of their exchanged words. A nauseating dread filled Evangeline. She ducked into the restroom, heart pounding, tears pricking at her eyes. Though she had no definitive proof, her intuition told her that her husband was entwined with a mistress, a conclusion that felt like a blade twisting in her chest. Bianca was nothing if not audacious. The seeds of her bold plan were sown when she discovered she had a connection who could land front row. VIP tickets to Beyoncé's sold-out show at Madison Square Garden. These tickets were arguably the hottest commodity in New York, a city that was no stranger to star-studded events. Thousands of fans scrambled for even the worst seats in the nosebleed section. But Bianca aimed high, expecting a night of glitz, paparazzi, and the thrill of flaunting her powerful lover in public. One evening, in her minimalist Soho loft strewn with fashion magazines, Bianca draped herself across a white leather chaise. She presented the ticket envelope to Richard with a mischievous grin. 2 front-row seats, plus backstage passes, she purred. You and me, living it up at the show. Richard tensed at the suggestion. Public events meant the risk of recognition. Although he was not a Hollywood celebrity, he was well known in the business press and upper social circles. Attending a high-profile concert on the arm of a woman who was not his wife practically courted scandal. "Isn't that too dangerous?" he asked, a deep line furrowing his brow. Bianca batted her lashes in feigned innocence. "Oh, come on, everyone at that concert is there to see Beyoncé. Besides, who's going to pay attention to a real estate mogul in the crowd? You've been spending too much time reading gossip rags." He was torn. A part of him yearned to take the risk, the same part that had led him to countless lucrative deals no one else dared to touch. Another part, the sliver of him that still cared about Evangeline, felt a sharp pang of guilt. In the end, adrenaline won out. He rationalized that it would be dark inside the arena, that they could slip in and out with minimal fuss. "I'll figure out a cover story," he murmured, ignoring the gnaw in his gut. "We'll do it carefully." The next day, Richard approached Evangeline and casually mentioned he had to fly out to Boston for a key negotiation. He claimed it might stretch late into the following night. "Don't worry if you don't hear from me until the day after," he said, carefully averting his gaze. "This deal is delicate." Evangeline's gaze held a quiet sadness. "All right," she murmured, trying to be supportive despite the doubts that weighed on her heart. "Just be safe." She turned away, and he exhaled with relief, unaware that seeds of suspicion were already planted. Through a discreet chain of social connections, Evangeline's sister Margaret learned that Richard had been bragging, albeit indirectly, to a mutual acquaintance about attending the Beyoncé concert, supposedly with a new business partner. The rumor made its way back to Evangeline faster than Richard could have ever predicted. Determined not to live in ignorance, Evangeline secured 2 tickets of her own, albeit far from the VIP front rows. Margaret vowed to accompany her sister, no questions asked. Thus, on a chilly evening with the city's neon lights shimmering over the bustling crowds, Evangeline prepared to take a stand. She might have been pregnant, but she was done being placated. Madison Square Garden pulsed with anticipation for Beyoncé's sold-out performance. The sidewalks outside were clogged with fans sporting sequins, bright lipstick, and hand-drawn signs. Street vendors hawked T-shirts, programs, and glow sticks. Taxis jostled for space along the curb. The giant LED marquee announced Beyoncé live at MSG, sending fresh waves of excitement through the throngs. Richard arrived in a black SUV at a private entrance designated for VIP guests. Wearing a tailored navy suit, he stepped out alongside Bianca, who sparkled in a form-fitting silver dress with a dangerously high slit. Flashes from a few cameras popped, capturing their arrival. Bianca reveled in it, waving like a starlet. Richard tried to maintain a low profile, tugging at his cuffs and scanning for anyone who might recognize him. Meanwhile, Evangeline and Margaret lined up with the general crowd, successfully blending in with the masses. Evangeline wore a simple black maternity dress that stretched comfortably over her prominent belly. Her nerves churned. She had never done anything like this, sneaking off to catch her husband in what felt like a live betrayal. Margaret squeezed her hand in silent support. Once inside, Evangeline felt the collective energy of thousands of fans waiting for the concert. Pounding bass thumped through the stadium speakers, and overhead, screens displayed promotional footage. She could almost forget why she was really there, almost. She scanned the VIP sections visible from her vantage point, her eyes sweeping rows of glamorous attendees. She spotted an area cordoned off by event staff, draped in velvet ropes. Security personnel stood at attention. It had to be the VIP lounge. Margaret guided her to a side corridor, forging a path through the sea of excited concert-goers. She whispered, "We'll find a way in." Holding Evangeline's elbow to steady her, Margaret approached the lounge entrance. A security guard frowned at their tickets, shaking his head. "Sorry, ladies, this area is exclusive. You'll have to return to your seats," he said, not unkindly. Margaret, fierce in her dedication to her sister, lowered her voice. "Look, my sister is pregnant, and we have a personal matter with someone inside. Could you please make an exception?" "Just for a few minutes." She slid a folded bill discreetly into the guard's palm. He hesitated, casting a glance around to ensure no one noticed, then nodded curtly. 5 minutes, that's it." Evangeline felt her heart thunder as they slipped past the barrier. The lounge had subdued lighting, plush chairs, a private bar, and large screens broadcasting the pre-show. She spotted well-dressed couples, a sprinkling of celebrities and business magnates. Near the far end, she recognized Richard's tall frame, facing away from her. Her pulse galloped. Bianca was leaning against him, laughter playing on her lips. She wore a diamond necklace that glinted under the ambient light. From their body language alone, it was obvious they were more than colleagues. The final blow came when Bianca trailed her fingertips over Richard's lapel, murmuring something that made him smirk. Evangeline didn't need to see more. She cleared her throat, stepping forward with trembling courage. "Enjoying the concert atmosphere, Richard?" she asked, her voice slicing the hush like a blade. He spun around, eyes wide. In that split second, his entire expression betrayed horror and shame. Bianca's laugh died on her lips when she saw the pregnant woman confronting them. The lounge's chatter subsided as nearby onlookers sensed drama. Margaret stood just behind Evangeline, arms crossed, her stare lethal. Richard opened and closed his mouth, failing to conjure any plausible lie. Bianca's face turned pale, then hardened with defiance, as though she had braced herself for a confrontation, but not in such a public setting. Evangeline's voice quivered with both fury and heartbreak. "Is this your business trip to Boston? Does your business partner typically hang all over you like this?" Richard tried to whisper some apology or explanation, but words failed him. He glanced around, suddenly conscious that everyone was watching. His reputation, his entire facade, lay in pieces. Bianca bristled under Evangeline's glare. "This isn't what it looks like," she ventured, feigning calm. Evangeline's eyes narrowed. "What part of seeing my husband with his arms around another woman am I misunderstanding?" She clasped a hand protectively over her swollen belly. "I'm carrying your child, Richard, and you're here parading your affair in public." A stunned silence gripped the lounge. Richard's face was ashen, as if he'd realized there was no salvaging the moment. He reached for Evangeline's hand in desperation, but she recoiled. "We're leaving," she declared to Margaret, voice thick with tears. "I'm done." With that, Evangeline turned, fighting to maintain composure as she walked out. Margaret trailed behind, casting one last withering look at Richard and Bianca. Cameras flashed in the corridor, capturing Evangeline, wiping tears from her cheeks. Her pregnant form, a stark reminder of the betrayal at hand. In seconds, the narrative was set. A millionaire real estate magnate caught at one of the most publicized concerts of the year, with his wife blindsided. What should have been a triumphant evening for Bianca had turned into a scandal destined to ignite social media and gossip columns. And the immediate aftershock was only the beginning. Evangeline refused to speak to Richard for the next few days. She retreated to her sister Margaret's apartment, where she sobbed through her heartbreak, feeling her baby's kicks as a cruel reminder of the family life Richard had chosen to desecrate. Margaret offered unwavering support, shielding her sister from the onslaught of phone calls that followed. Richard, for his part, was frantic. After the chaotic scene in the lounge, he'd tried to chase Evangeline through the concert crowds, but was blocked by confused security staff. He ended up returning to Bianca's loft, shaking with humiliation. Bianca tried to console him, but even she couldn't pretend the situation wasn't catastrophic. By morning, photos and rumors circulated online. Small-time gossip sites loved the angle of a wealthy mogul humiliating his pregnant wife at a high-profile concert. Where was his sense of discretion? One blogger snarked. Business news outlets also picked up the scandal, speculating how this negative spotlight might tarnish his brand. Some investors placed urgent calls to Richard's office, concerned about the stability of his ventures. At first, Richard tried to manage the crisis with standard PR maneuvers. His communications director advised him to issue a neutral statement, something about unfounded rumors. Yet the photographic evidence was undeniable, and the public thrives on scandal, not corporate spin. Realizing damage control was futile, he pivoted to personal pleas. He flooded Evangeline's phone with text messages. "I'm sorry, I'll do anything to fix this, please call me." None received a response. He even showed up at Margaret's doorstep, but the doorman refused him entry. Evangeline wanted no part of him. Meanwhile, Evangeline was in a daze. She recalled the day she had told Richard about her pregnancy, the way he scooped her into his arms in tearful joy. How had it all gone so wrong? She wasn't naive enough to blame only Bianca. Richard had chosen to step out on his marriage. This betrayal was his responsibility, and no matter how many apologies he offered, the trust had been shattered. Margaret convinced her to hire a high-powered family attorney, Katrina Lee, who specialized in high-profile divorces. Katrina listened intently, taking thorough notes on Evangeline's account of the betrayal. "Given the public nature of the infidelity and the pregnancy, you're in a strong negotiating position," Katrina advised. Evangeline felt her stomach twist. It felt surreal to discuss her marriage in terms of legal strategy. Yet she knew she had to protect herself and her child. In an early meeting, Katrina suggested filing for a legal separation, which would force Richard out of the penthouse they owned. Evangeline agreed, even though she hated the idea of upending her home. But any illusions of a normal life with Richard were beyond saving. If he could flaunt his mistress on such a grand stage, he had already devalued their marriage. While the scandal battered Richard's finances and connections, Bianca attempted to keep him close, spinning the narrative that they'd weather this together. But deep inside, she was furious. She'd never meant to become a tabloid spectacle. She had courted drama, yes, but not in a way that might ruin her own social climbing aspirations. She wanted to stand beside a powerful man, not watch him self-destruct. The stage had been set for a sequence of karmic reckonings, one that would unravel both Richard's once flawless reputation and Bianca's careful schemes. With his personal life in ruin, Richard found that his professional life began to falter. Some of his largest investors expressed concerns about his judgment, citing the scandal's potential impact on market confidence. A few deals that once seemed certain now hung in limbo, as partners hesitated to move forward amid the swirling gossip. Richard had always believed his success was built on unstoppable forward momentum. Now, that momentum halted. He spent nights awake, pacing an empty penthouse he had not yet vacated, but legal notices were in motion, staring at the phone that Evangeline refused to answer. Sometimes he'd pick up the wedding photo on his desk, Evangeline smiling radiantly, her hand clasped in his. He felt a stab of longing for the life he had thrown away. Bianca sensed his distress and tried to rekindle the seductive air that once intoxicated him. She invited him to glittering parties, whisked him off to exclusive clubs, and insisted he keep spending to project an aura of stability. When he hesitated, worried about optics, she belittled his concern. "You're Richard Harrington. Act like it. Don't let them see you sweat." But the truth was, he was now hemorrhaging money in an effort to sustain appearances. The lawyer's fees for his separation from Evangeline climbed. PR consultants charged exorbitant rates to craft statements that might ease the damage. The more Bianca urged him to flaunt wealth, the more he felt weighed down by anxiety. In a pivotal argument, Richard snapped at Bianca for the first time. "This isn't some game. I'm facing real losses, losing the respect of my peers. My wife is about to have our baby, and I'm not even welcome in my own home. Don't you get it?" Bianca's eyes flared with anger. "Don't blame me for your choices, Richard. If you wanted to be the doting husband, you wouldn't have come near me in the first place. Now either step up or step away." That confrontation chilled their romance, though it didn't end it. They continued a strained arrangement, both unsure how far they could trust each other. Meanwhile, in the background, Evangeline moved forward with the separation. Katrina helped her file motions that demanded Richard vacate the penthouse within a month. She also laid the groundwork for a substantial financial settlement, citing the unborn child's needs. Though it pained Evangeline to rely on legal might, she recognized that the man she once adored was gone. If Richard wanted to chase illusions, let him face the consequences. She would focus on the well-being of her child, who kicked more vigorously each day, as if reminding her that a fresh chapter lay ahead. While heartbreak consumed her nights, Evangeline found new strength in unexpected places. Margaret, who had been a constant support, introduced her to an online forum of mothers who had navigated divorces and toxic relationships. Reading their stories gave Evangeline perspective. She realized she wasn't alone, that many women had rebuilt lives far more stable and joyous after escaping betrayal. She also plunged into preparations for the baby's arrival. She used a portion of her inherited funds to rent a cozy apartment in a building near her favorite art gallery, smaller than the penthouse, but brimming with light and warmth. She painted the walls of the nursery a soft lavender, placing a simple white crib in the corner. Every brushstroke felt like she was reclaiming her autonomy, forging a life that didn't revolve around Richard's whims. Her obstetrician, Dr. Patel, noticed the shift. During checkups, Evangeline radiated a calmer energy. She spoke about the future with a measured optimism, though tears sometimes glistened in her eyes if asked about her husband. Dr. Patel encouraged her to maintain low stress, reminding her that emotional well-being was crucial for a healthy delivery. Evangeline joined a prenatal yoga class where she met other soon-to-be mums, forming friendships that affirmed she could thrive in single motherhood. Meanwhile, her sister Margaret helped finalize baby shower arrangements, carefully limiting the guest list to those who wouldn't push or gossip about Richard. The event was modest but heartfelt, featuring pastel decorations, gifts of tiny clothes, and hand-stitched blankets. Evangeline felt a pang whenever the conversation drifted to fatherhood, but she smiled graciously, reminding herself that her baby had plenty of love waiting. As the weeks ticked closer to her due date, Evangeline no longer jumped at the sound of her phone, hoping it was Richard. She'd accepted that whatever apologies he might offer would not be enough to mend the damage. If someday he proved worthy as a father, she would consider letting him into the child's life, but never again on the same terms. She owed that to herself and to her future as a strong woman who refused to be defined by a man's failures. Richard's unraveling accelerated when a crucial investor walked away from a high-end construction project in Tribeca. The news hit his desk mere days after Evangeline's legal documents demanded he leave the penthouse. He found himself increasingly powerless, watching as once loyal associates turned cold. Doubting his leadership, they questioned whether personal drama had made him unreliable. He tried to quell the fires. He organized frantic phone calls, scheduled desperate lunches to reassure clients that he remained the savvy businessman they had always known. But the media optics weighed heavily. An infamous paparazzo photo showed Bianca stepping out of Richard's penthouse building early one morning, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, fuel for those who already believed he was ignoring his wife in her final trimester. Every time Richard opened the newspaper's society section or scrolled through online blogs, he saw references to the meltdown of his marriage. A sense of self-loathing bloomed, though he fought it by clinging to the facade of control. He even tried therapy at the urging of a friend, but after 2 sessions, he abandoned it. Unwilling to break through his own defenses, Bianca proved increasingly volatile. She demanded that Richard purchase her pricey gifts, limited edition jewelry, a new sports car to demonstrate that he was still committed to their lifestyle. When he hesitated, citing financial caution, she grew resentful. It struck him then that their relationship was built not on love, but on illusions of grandeur. One night, Bianca confronted him about his constant brooding. "If you're so miserable, why don't you just cut ties and go beg your wife to take you back?" she mocked. Her voice rang through her loft's expensive marble kitchen. Richard's anger flared. "You think that's an option? I've destroyed what I had. Evangeline won't forgive me." Bianca's laughter was bitter. "Then you might as well embrace what we have left." She gestured at her luxurious space. "Or do you feel guilty that I'm not enough?" They stood at an impasse, their illusions about each other cracking further. Richard stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city he once believed he dominated. Now it felt as though the city was devouring him, piece by piece. It happened on a stormy evening. Lightning illuminated the Manhattan skyline in electric arcs, thunder rattling the windows. Evangeline's contractions began earlier than expected, catching her off guard in the solitude of her new apartment. At first, she thought it was just another bout of pregnancy discomfort. But the pain escalated quickly, each wave longer and sharper. She called Margaret, who rushed over in a swirl of worry, then dialed for an ambulance when she realized Evangeline could barely stand upright without gasping. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, guiding Evangeline onto a stretcher and whisking her through rain-slicked streets to the nearest hospital. Halfway to the hospital, Margaret decided, however she felt about Richard, he deserved to know his child was on the way. She dialed him, her voice tense. "Evangeline's in labor, Lenox Hill Hospital. It's early, but the baby's coming. If you want to see your child born, get there now." She hung up before he could respond. Richard, who had been brooding alone in his rapidly emptying penthouse, felt his heart lurch. For months, he had envisioned this moment under entirely different circumstances, Evangeline by his side. The two of them preparing as a loving couple. Now, it felt like an open wound. Dropping everything, he grabbed a coat, dashed into the hallway, and flagged the first taxi he saw. At the hospital, he arrived drenched from the downpour, adrenaline surging. A nurse pointed him toward the maternity ward, where he found Margaret pacing. She shot him a look filled with bitterness and worry. "Don't upset her," Margaret warned, but she didn't try to stop him. Evangeline was in active labor, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead, her face contorted with pain. Doctors and nurses surrounded her. When she spotted Richard in the doorway, her breath hitched, whether from anger, heartbreak, or relief, he couldn't be sure. Then another contraction tore through her, and she let out a cry, refocusing on the immediate battle of bringing a child into the world. Cautiously, Richard approached, murmuring, "I'm here if you need me." She didn't respond, but she allowed him to hold her hand for a moment. Her grip tightened like a vise as the contractions built. He felt tears blur his vision. Everything else in his life, money, scandal, illusions, melted away at that instant. The labor was intense, but mercifully not prolonged. Within an hour, a piercing newborn wail filled the hospital room. The medical staff gently placed a tiny, wriggling baby girl on Evangeline's chest. Evangeline sobbed with exhausted joy, cradling the delicate life in her arms. Even Margaret had tears shining in her eyes. Richard stood by the bedside, overwhelmed by awe and guilt, glimpsing his daughter's tiny fists, the newborn's quivering lips. He reached out a trembling hand. For a moment, Evangeline allowed him to touch the baby's forehead. Their eyes met. Her gaze held heartbreak, but also an indescribable mixture of relief and maternal protectiveness. That fleeting moment of unity ended quickly. A nurse stepped in to handle post-delivery checks, and Richard stepped back, suddenly unsure of his place. Evangeline turned away, focusing solely on the infant. He knew that, while he had witnessed a miracle, any chance of reclaiming Evangeline's heart was far from guaranteed. Evangeline and her baby, named Sophia, spent the next few days in the hospital for observation. Margaret remained a constant presence, handling phone calls and ensuring Evangeline had whatever she needed. Despite everything, Evangeline allowed Richard short visits, though their conversations remained minimal. Her attorney, Katrina, visited once Evangeline had recovered enough for a calm discussion. It was time to finalize the process of separation and possibly divorce. The baby's arrival prompted immediate questions of custody, child support, and living arrangements. Evangeline had no desire to sever Richard from Sophia entirely, but she insisted on conditions that guaranteed she and the baby would not be drawn into his chaotic life. Richard, for his part, stood at the threshold of an agonizing choice. He could fight to maintain some semblance of his old empire, or prioritize his daughter and accept legal compromises that might break him financially. The significance of fatherhood had ignited something in him. For once, he saw that losing more money might be a small price to pay if it meant forging a genuine relationship with Sophia. When Evangeline was discharged, she chose to return to her own apartment. She made it clear to Richard that he was not welcome to drop by unannounced. The first time he visited to see Sophia, he arrived with a bouquet of lilies and baby gifts, only to find Evangeline guarded but polite. She allowed him a short window to hold the baby, instructing him on how to support her head. A nurse she'd hired lingered in the background, a silent chaperone ensuring the baby's well-being. The moment he cradled his daughter, Richard felt something shift within. He realized, belatedly, the depth of his mistake in trading paternal devotion for an affair that had crumbled anyway. Bianca was still in the picture, but their relationship had deteriorated. She demanded lavish attention he could no longer afford to provide. They argued often, each blaming the other for the fiasco that had befallen them. In the following weeks, under heavy emotional strain, Richard decided to end things with Bianca for good. He told her that his priority was now salvaging the shards of fatherhood he had left. Bianca responded with scorn, calling him weak, telling him she had no desire to remain tethered to a man whose fortunes were in decline. That night, Richard packed a suitcase from Bianca's loft and left, unsure where he would stay next. Karma was rearing its head, requiring him to confront all the illusions he had built. His empire was smaller, his finances under siege, and he was perched on the outside of a family he might never fully reclaim. Yet he realized, ironically, that this clarity was the first honest step he had taken in years. Bianca Martel, alias Bianca Street, James had not expected to crash and burn so spectacularly. She found her social connections evaporating as the scandal around the concert continued to swirl. No philanthropic committee wanted to be associated with her. Invites to exclusive gatherings dried up. She was rumored to be courting wealthy European men now, hoping to latch onto another source of status. A final blow came when the funds from a questionable real estate investment she had orchestrated vanished, forcing her to liquidate many of her high-end possessions. Richard cut all ties, refusing to be manipulated further. In time, her name became a cautionary footnote among the city's upper crust, the affair that helped ruin a once powerful figure's marriage. For Evangeline, however, life steadily improved. She found contentment in caring for her daughter, and her sister Margaret remained a rock by her side. With her attorney's guidance, Evangeline and Richard drafted a formal custody agreement. He would have supervised visitation rights at first, given the chaotic circumstances. Over time, if he demonstrated responsibility, they could expand that arrangement. Richard liquidated some properties to cover a generous child support settlement. The man who once flaunted an empire now lived in a modest apartment and drove a sedan instead of a luxury car. Some might have viewed that as tragic, but in the long run, it saved him from the endless cycle of pretension he had endured. Sophia grew quickly, each milestone a tiny miracle: her first smile, her first laugh, the ability to grip Richard's finger. Though Evangeline had not forgiven him in a romantic sense, she did recognize that he was at least striving to be present for Sophia. Sometimes she caught glimpses of regret in his eyes that mirrored her own heartbreak. In therapy sessions he resumed, Richard confronted the emptiness that had led him to sabotage his life. The process was excruciating, but step by step he learned how to accept responsibility rather than shift blame. He still loved Evangeline in his own flawed way, but he understood that the trust he'd shattered could not be easily rebuilt, if ever. Watching Evangeline flourish as a dedicated mother, Richard acknowledged the karmic lesson. Betrayal always demands a price, no matter how wealthy or powerful you are. He felt the sting of losing Evangeline's devotion more acutely than any business failure, and he realized that in chasing an illicit thrill, he had discarded the very life that once brought him genuine warmth. Months rolled into a year. The tabloids moved on to new scandals, allowing Richard and Evangeline some measure of privacy. Evangeline discovered an unexpected passion in interior design, starting a boutique consultancy that catered to upscale clients looking for serenity in their living spaces. She wove her artistic sensibilities into each project, building a modest but growing reputation for tasteful, calming aesthetics. Sophia's first birthday was a small gathering at Evangeline's apartment. Margaret, close friends, and a few supportive relatives attended. Evangeline debated whether to invite Richard, ultimately deciding Sophia deserved to see her father on such a special day. Richard arrived carrying a soft plush giraffe and a heartfelt card. He seemed nervous, uncertain of his reception, but Evangeline allowed him to partake, snapping a few photos as he carefully helped Sophia tear the wrapping paper. No grand reconciliation occurred, but the atmosphere was calm. Evangeline even managed a fleeting smile in Richard's direction. It was a moment that exemplified their fragile new normal, co-parenting with civility, setting aside personal bitterness in favor of their child's happiness. Richard continued to stabilize financially, picking smaller but ethical real estate projects. He no longer chased the same scale of deals that once fueled his ego. Instead, he focused on mindful investments that wouldn't require sacrificing his emotional health. On weekends, he visited Sophia, playing peekaboo and reading stories. Each time he left, his heart ached with the reminder that he no longer had a home with Evangeline. But at least he wasn't locked out entirely. Bianca's fate was less pleasant. Stripped of her wealth and social standing, she drifted to Miami, seeking a fresh start among a new circle. Rumors suggested she latched onto a shady art dealer for quick funds, a cycle repeating. Her hunger for luxury endured, unmoored by any moral compass. She had no contact with Richard beyond the occasional bitter voicemail, telling him he owed her for their time together, which he promptly ignored. Though Richard's humiliation had been public and painful, it had forced him into a metamorphosis. Like a phoenix rising from ashes, he discovered humility in the wreckage. He might never regain Evangeline's trust or love, but at least he could aspire to be a decent father and a more genuine man. Sometimes betrayal leaves scars that no amount of wealth or remorse can fully erase. Richard Harrington learned this lesson in the rawest possible way. By indulging in a reckless affair, flaunting his new companion at an iconic Beyoncé concert in Madison Square Garden, he tore apart the marriage he once prized and lost the respect of the city that had celebrated him. Evangeline, stunned by the public humiliation, realized her strength in motherhood, forging a new home for herself and their daughter. Though she granted Richard limited access to the child he had nearly forsaken, the deeper wounds between them remained slow to heal. Still, from that night of heartbreak emerged a more grounded existence. Evangeline built a thriving design career, and Richard rechanneled his talents into honest work, shorn of the illusions that once drove him. If you found value in this story of secrets, consequences, and survival, please like, share, and subscribe to support more compelling narratives. Your engagement means we can continue bringing powerful lessons to life for everyone.